Some flames consume the flesh, others the soul. But this one, it burns reality itself. Demon archivist Threx, scribe of the third circle, whispers in the warp, when a world burns, the warp always listens. Every scream, every prayer, every drop of blood is a ripple, a signal to things that dream in madness. For eons, the Chaos Gods had watched the galaxy's wars with indifference. They did not care which mortals killed which. They only cared for the why. But when the Rider's flame touched the veil, it didn't just consume bodies, it purified sin. And that was a problem. The warp feeds on sin, on fear, rage, lust, decay. But this fire unmade those emotions. Where it burned, demons starved. Where it judged, warp tides stilled. In the Empyrean, the gods stirred. Khorne snarled. Tsench tilted his many heads in intrigue. Slaanesh hissed in pain. Nurgle wept with something like sorrow. And for the first time in 1,000 millennia, they agreed on one thing. The flame must be stopped. The blood god's challenge. Khorne was the first to act. To him, the Rider was an insult, a warrior who fought not for victory, but for penance. The blood god tore open a rift in the void, and from it spilled legions of brass and bone, world eaters, demon engines, and rivers of blood that boiled in zero gravity. Their warships roared across the void, red sigils glowing like molten scars. They descended upon the Rider's planet, intent on drowning judgment in slaughter. The Rider met them on the ashes of the Inquisition's last fortress. He did not speak. He simply walked into the tide. Chains whirled. Fire roared. Bolters melted. Demons screamed, not in death, but in revelation. Because every kill the Rider made did not feed Khorne's power, it took from it. Their rage turned into guilt, their hate into horror, their souls into ash. When the battle ended, the blood flowed backward, sucked into the burning skull's gaze. And in the warp, Khorne bellowed in fury, for his offerings had turned to smoke. The changer of ways schemes. Tsench saw opportunity where Khorne saw insult. A flame that rewrote sin was a flame that rewrote fate. To him, this spirit of vengeance was not a threat but a tool. He sent visions into the dreams of mortal psychers, promises whispered in cinders. Command the fire, bend it to your will, burn the galaxy anew. Some heard, some believed, and soon, cults of burning rebirth spread across the stars. Fanatics who worshipped the Rider as a god, claiming that through flame, they would be purified and reborn. They began burning themselves alive in his name. Their screams echoed through the warp like hymns. And Tsench smiled, for in their fanaticism, he wove his next plan. He manifested a demon prince forged entirely from sacred flame. A mimic, a false ghost, bearing a skull wreathed in lies. Its chain was made of serpents. Its eyes, twin sons of deceit. Tsench called it the mirror flame. He sent it into real space, to replace the Rider, to twist his vengeance into chaos. The mirror flame, the two met under a broken moon. The true Rider arrived in silence. The false one spoke first, its voice echoing in infinite tones. You burn for justice. I burn for purpose. We are the same fire, you and I. The Rider's skull tilted slightly, his chains rattling in the stillness. I am not your reflection. They fought for 3 days and nights, their flames tearing reality open. The warp bled into the material. Stars dimmed from the heat. Every time the mirror flame struck, its fire twisted into new shapes. Dragons, wings, screaming faces. But every time the Rider struck, his flame remained pure, unyielding, uncorrupted. In the end, he wrapped his chain around the false one's throat, pulled it close, and whispered, "Look into your own sin." The mirror flame screamed, and in its eyes saw nothing but itself. It collapsed into ash, its fire returning to the warp with a sound like breaking glass. Tsench's laughter echoed, but faintly, for even he had not foreseen purity that burned without ambition. Slaanesh and the hunger of light, but where the others failed through fury or deceit, Slaanesh approached with temptation. The Dark Prince whispered through the voices of the damned, through the soft sighs of those who once sought redemption. Why fight your pain? Why not feel it? Every sin you judge is a story unfinished. Every scream could be a song. In a garden of shattered mirrors and golden bones, Slaanesh appeared before the rider, a creature of beauty and terror both. He or she offered a bargain. Share your fire with me. Together, we will burn not for judgment, but for pleasure. For the first time since his rebirth, the rider hesitated. In his past life, as blaze, as man, as soul, there had been desire. There had been love. There had been want. Slaanesh smiled, feeling that weakness. The god reached out, fingers of light brushing against the edge of his skull, and was burned. The rider raised his gaze. You mistake pain for purpose. The flame around him turned white. Slaanesh's form screamed, a sound of pleasure and agony indistinguishable, and vanished into the warp, its laughter fading into nothingness. The garden became cinders. Nurgle's sadness, only Nurgle did not attack. From his garden of rot, the Plague Father watched the rider burn worlds clean, and he whispered softly, even my decay cannot heal what he burns. There is no renewal in his flame, only ending. He sent no armies. He only wept, for the rider was not creation, not corruption, but the stillness between them. A silence even disease could not fill. The warp reacts the gods withdrew, but their touch had consequences. The warp itself began to warp around the rider's presence. Storms of raw guilt formed behind his trail. Ships traveling near his path found their Geller fields silent. Demons refused to emerge in his proximity, not out of fear, but because their sins turned to dust before they could manifest. He had become a black hole of damnation, a living paradox, a creature of hell that hell could not use. The Imperium could no longer hide him. The warp could no longer contain him, and something even older, even darker, had begun to notice. The eye opens deep in the eye of terror. Amid screaming stars and corpse gods, a throne of skulls cracked. Not corns, but another, something beneath, something forgotten since the birth of chaos itself. A voice older than time hissed, a soul that judges the damned must one day judge itself. And from the eye something vast began to stir, a shape that even the gods feared, a presence that remembered when angels first fell. The rider's flame had woken a memory, a secret older than the Imperium, older than hell, older than vengeance itself. And it was coming for him. Long before the first demon whispered, long before Terra had a name, there was judgment, and it burned. Fragment recovered from the Librarius Obscurus, Segmentum Solar, the fire before time in the beginning. There was only thought. The Immaterium was pure, not yet warp, not yet madness. It was light without heat, emotion without form. Every soul that would ever live existed there, unborn, untainted. Then came betrayal. One spark broke from the stillness. Not of sin, not of evil, but of choice. That spark became fire. Fire became will. And will inevitably became judgment. It was said the first flame asked a question. If perfection can choose imperfection, is it still divine? The universe answered in screams. Stars were born as penance. Worlds cooled as graves. And in the silence between them, that same fire lingered, waiting for vessels, for hosts who could carry the weight of judgment through flesh. That fire was the spirit of vengeance. And long before Johnny Blaze ever made a deal with Mephisto, long before any man called upon hell for justice, this flame had walked the stars. When the warp was young eons before humanity's rise, before chaos took shape, there was an event the demons never speak of, the first war in heaven. The old ones, beings of pure psychic design, had harnessed the Immaterium as a weapon. They shaped the thoughts of reality, creating gods, enslaving emotions. But in doing so, they fractured the perfect light that once was. And from the fracture came judgment. It descended as a comet of silver flame, burning through the early warp. Every lie screamed as it passed. Every unclean thought turned to ash. Even the proto-gods turned their faces away. The flame judged the old ones, their hubris, their manipulation, their hidden cruelty. And though it burned entire dimensions clean, it could not destroy what would become chaos. For every time it punished evil, Some spark of pity within it reignited what it had slain. The flame's mercy became its curse. From that paradox, demons were born. The soul engine in the time that followed, the flame dimmed. It drifted through centuries and galaxies, seeking balance, never finding it, until the dark age of technology. Humanity, arrogant as ever, discovered fragments of the old flame buried in the Martian crust, remnants of judgment trapped within crystal lattices of lost machines. They called it the soul engine, a power source that burned guilt instead of fuel. Tech priests worshipped it, psychers feared it. When exposed to sin, it ignited, a silent white fire that consumed corruption in pure energy. The Mechanicus attempted to replicate it. They failed. Every replication either killed its user or sanctified them into living torches. So they buried it again. Deep beneath Mars, beneath vaults even the Fabricator General dared not open. But some echoes cannot be contained. One spark escaped, fell to Terra, found a man who made a deal with hell. And from that union of infernal and divine, the spirit of vengeance was reborn. The war within heaven. When the rider came to the 41st millennium, the flame remembered everything. Every world it had burned, every sin it had forgiven, every god it had failed to destroy. And now it saw the Imperium, a million worlds ruled by fear, a church that preached purity while drowning in blood. For the first time since his damnation, the rider's flame hesitated. Was this justice or hypocrisy made holy? He wandered cathedral cities and tomb planets, judging not with rage, but confusion. He found saints whose halos were forged from skulls, priests who flayed heretics by day, then begged forgiveness by night. And when he burned them, their sins screamed. But the screams were not of evil. They were of faith. The flame faltered. For what happens when vengeance finds no innocence left to protect? The arrival of the seraphic host in that moment of weakness. The sky broke. Not with demons, not with warp storms, but with light. From the void descended the seraphic host of the Emperor, beings of gold and fire, angels of the Master of mankind, forged from psychic flame and belief. They encircled the rider, their voices blending into hymns that cracked the air. "You are fire of another kind," they said, "a judgment not born of him on Terra. Leave this realm. The Emperor judges alone." The rider looked upon them, and for the first time, his skull bowed slightly, not in submission but recognition. "I have seen judgment," he said. "I have carried it. But your God does not judge, he endures. That is not justice. That is survival." The angels drew their blades of light, but before they could strike, the ground beneath them burned with a deeper flame, one older than the Emperor's own psychic power. The spirit of vengeance had remembered its origin. It burned in both hell and heaven. It answered to neither. The seraphic host screamed as they fell, their wings turning black, their armor melting into rivers of faith. The fire that judges fire, the rider stood amidst the ruin. Flames fell like rain, each drop whispering the same truth, that judgment, when perfect, burns all, even those who claim to be pure. The warp trembled, the immaterium bent, and in the void between them, something ancient whispered his name. Not Johnny Blaze, not Rider, but the first flame. For the first time, the rider saw not vengeance, but purpose. To burn both heaven and hell. To erase the lie that one was better than the other. To leave only the silence that comes after justice is done. And with that realization, his flame turned blue. The warp recoiled. Demons howled. The Emperor stirred upon his golden throne, his eyes flickering for the briefest moment, as if remembering something long forgotten. The last memory of the fire in the secret archives beneath the palace. A single line remains on a data slate scorched beyond repair. The blue flame came before the Emperor's light. No one knows what it means. No one dares to ask. But there are some among the Adeptus Custodes who swear that sometimes, just before the Astronomicon dims, they see a rider of blue fire passing silently across the void, as if judging even the light itself. The flames had turned quiet. Not gone, never gone, but quieter, like a great beast drawing breath in the dark. Ghost Rider stood amidst a valley of ash where once an imperial fortress had risen. The sky was a smear of blood-red lightning. Dead banners clung to blackened poles, whispering oaths no one lived to keep. His chain, blackened with demon blood, hung slack in his hand. He was remembering. Memories came like sparks, brief and cruel. A priest begging for forgiveness as he was branded by his own congregation. A mother whispering her son's name before the exterminatus fire took her. A space marine chaplain whose skull still screamed sermons from within the warp fire that consumed it. Ghost Rider did not weep. He could not, but the fire inside his skull burned lower, softer, almost contemplative. And then a voice. You carry the Emperor's judgment, but wear a demon's face. From the mist stepped a figure in robes of scorched white and gold. A sister of battle, her armor cracked but still gleaming with defiance. Her bolter was raised, but her hands trembled. "What are you?" she demanded. The rider's voice came out like a furnace door opening. "Justice. Justice died long ago," she spat. "There is only punishment now." He tilted his head. The flame flared, not in anger, but in something like agreement. "Then we are kin." The sister's eyes widened. "You speak heresy." He stepped closer. The ground blackened beneath his boots. "No, I speak truth." For a long time, they simply stood, the burning skull and the broken warrior, staring at one another through the ruinous night. Then she lowered her weapon. "If you are justice, then come. There is one who deserves it." They walked together through the ruins. The fortress had been shattered by orbital bombardment, yet something still pulsed deep beneath the rubble. A red light, faint but rhythmic. When they reached the source, the sister fell to her knees. A man, or what had been a man, hung crucified over a cracked altar, tubes and servo wires feeding from his flesh into the ground. Cardinal, his mouth sewn shut with rosary wire, his eyes wide open. The sister whispered. He ordered the purge of the orphanages, said their cries were heretical noise. Ghost Rider said nothing. He looked upon the man's trembling, silent face. Then the fire rose, raging, holy, vengeful. The chains lifted, the altar cracked, the wires melted away. When the rider spoke again, his voice echoed through the ruins and up into the stars. Vengeance is not a sin. The cardinal's body burned to cinders. The ground beneath them split like glass. When it was over, the sister was crying. But not from sorrow, from release. Ghost Rider turned to her. His skull dimmed again. You still have faith? She nodded, shaking. I don't know what I have anymore. Then you are closer to truth than most. As dawn, or what passed for dawn in a dying world, broke across the battlefield, the rider mounted his bike once more. The sister stood behind him, the hem of her robe smoldering gently. Where are you going? She called. The fire answered before he did. A roar that split the silence. Where there is sin. He vanished into the storm, leaving a single burning cross behind him. A symbol of faith twisted and reborn in flame. But that was only the beginning, for in the shadows of the warp, something watched. Something that had once been an angel. Something that smiled when it saw the rider burn. The warp has no mirrors, and yet it reflects everything. Every scream, every sin, every flicker of rage becomes a ripple across its infinite skin. And so when Ghost Rider's vengeance tore across worlds, when his flames consumed sinners, heretics, and demons alike, something noticed, something ancient, something hungry. It began as whispers, echoes carried through the warp tides like oil upon water. The flame walks again. It burns even hell itself. It carries judgment without worship. In the immaterial dark, where demons are born from emotion and madness, a new idea took form. A mockery, a mirror. It built itself out of ashes and screams. A skull made of black iron and warped glass. A body of chained shadows. Its heart a pulsing ember of stolen guilt. And when it first opened its eyes, it laughed. The rider felt it before he saw it. A storm unlike any other tore through the night. Not of wind, but of memory. The sins of entire worlds howled through the air, ghosts of every atrocity screaming in unison. His fire faltered. The bike's wheels hissed against the ground, leaving trails of molten stone as he slowed. Around him, reality shivered. The Sister of Battle, who had followed him through the wasteland, clutched her relic cross. What is this?" she gasped. The rider looked up, and there, through the lightning and smoke, something descended. It walked like him, it burned like him, but its flame was black, a void fire that devoured light, and its chain was made not of steel, but of souls. Every link screamed, "I am you," it hissed, voice splitting into 1,000 echoes. "The sin you pretend to judge, the vengeance that became its own crime." Ghost Rider's flame flared in defiance. "I am no demon." The thing laughed, a sound like glass shattering in oil. "Then what are you, spirit of punishment? You serve no god, yet you wield divine wrath. You damn the guilty, but who damned you?" It raised its hand and the air bent. The ground cracked, vomiting green light. The sister screamed as shadows rose like claws, dragging at her feet. Her prayers turned to static on her lips. The rider lashed his chain, the metal igniting with white-hot flame. The demon's chain met his mid-air, the impact sending shockwaves across the ruins. Fire met void fire. Judgment met corruption. And for a brief, terrible moment, the universe watched itself burn. Through the clash, visions spilled into the mortal world. Worlds burning under inquisitorial purges. Children chanting hymns in bombed cathedrals. 1,000 cries for salvation, and none answered. The demon smiled through the chaos. "See, your fire has no end, cannot heal. It only devours. You are mine." The rider's voice became a roar, shaking the stars. "I am everyone's sin, but no one's servant." The ground exploded. Fire and warp light devoured the sky. And when the storm cleared, they were both gone. Only scorched symbols remained. One burned into the stone in bright orange flame, a flaming skull. The other etched in black void, the same skull inverted and cracked. Two sides of one coin. The sister crawled through the ruins, whispering broken prayers. "Where are you?" The wind answered her. A faint echo carried from the distance. Still burning. Far away, deep within the warp, a lone flame drifted through darkness. It was small, flickering, but alive. And somewhere beyond the veil, a whisper replied, soft, almost kind. "You cannot kill vengeance. You can only watch it change. There is no direction in the warp. No sky, no ground, no mercy. Only movement, like drowning in the thoughts of gods long dead." Ghost Rider drifted through that formless nightmare. His fire flickered against the void like a candle in a storm. Every breath, if one could call it that, was an act of rebellion against oblivion itself. He could feel them watching, demons old and new, whispering things without mouths, their laughter gnawing at his skull. A spirit of vengeance that burns even here. How amusing. He punishes sin but cannot name his own. Let him burn until he remembers. The rider clenched his burning fists. His chains, even here, coiled like serpents eager to strike. But there was nothing to strike. Only whispers, and then a light. Not flame, not warp fire, something older. It took shape before him. A throne made of bone and star fragments, suspended over an ocean of screaming faces. Upon it sat a figure in armor of tarnished gold. Eyes closed, wings broken. The rider approached. Each step sent ripples through the sea of faces below, and the souls screamed his name. "You are the flame that escaped hell," the figure said, voice neither man nor god. "But here you will face judgment as all souls must." Ghost Rider's voice growled low, echoing in the nothing. "I am judgment." The being's eyes opened. They glowed with ancient fire. Not the red of chaos, nor the gold of the emperor, but something between. "Then judge yourself." The world shattered. He stood now in a city or the memory of one. Smoke choked the sky. People ran, burning. It was Earth. His Earth. Johnny Blaze, the man he once was, staggered through the wreckage, clutching his chest. He saw himself in the distance the first time the rider took control. He remembered the screams, the smell of fuel, the burning skin. "You wanted revenge," the golden being's voice whispered. "Not justice." The vision changed, cities of the Imperium now. Hive worlds burning, priests praying for salvation that never came. And the rider, astride his flaming steed, cutting through them, heretics and innocents alike swallowed by the same unrelenting fire. "You burn all the same, because you cannot tell the difference anymore." The rider dropped to his knees. His skull flickered, human eyes blinking through the flame for just a second. They were guilty? Were they? The voice thundered, and suddenly, the chains turned against him. They wrapped around his arms, his neck, his soul. Each link whispered a name. Names of the innocent who died screaming his judgment. Every weapon believes it is righteous until it sees what it has destroyed. The rider tried to speak, but the chains dragged him downward, through the molten ground, through memory and pain, until he struck something solid. He looked up. The black demon, the one who wore his face, stood waiting. "Welcome back," it sneered. "You've finally seen what I already knew. You and I are not opposites, spirit. We are brothers." It raised a hand, and the souls around them began to cheer. Their voices were not human. They were the cries of those who had burned under his judgment. "Now," said the demon, "let's see which of us deserves to burn." And so began the trial of the living flame. Their fires collided, but this time it was no mere battle. It was a war of truths. Every time the rider struck, the demon showed him a memory, a victim. Every time the demon attacked, the rider's soul screamed back in defiance. Back and forth they burned, until the warp itself trembled. Finally, the rider reached into his own chest, into the heart of the fire, and tore out his soul. A single ember, white-hot and pure. He held it up. "You are not my reflection. You are what's left when the fire forgets mercy." He thrust the ember into the demon's chest. The creature screamed, and for the first time, its flame turned to light. When the smoke cleared, there was only one rider left standing, and the warp was silent. He emerged back into reality, on a barren world of dust and stone. The sister of battle knelt beside a shrine, her armor dulled by time. When she saw him, she didn't speak. She only bowed her head. He looked up at the sky. The stars burned cold and indifferent. "Justice isn't pure," he said softly. "It burns the hand that holds it." He mounted his bike once more. The wheels hissed to life. But someone has to carry it. The fire roared, brighter than before, but softer too. And as he vanished into the distance, the sister whispered a prayer not to the emperor, but to the flame that still remembers. But the story did not end there. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But once, just once, something else came through the void. Not hope, not mercy, vengeance. The night above Carthago's fore was wrong. It did not roar with thunder as it should have. It whispered. Ash drifted like snow through the broken manufactorum hives, and every spire burned at the edges, not with flame but with the faint red shimmer of a dying atmosphere. The air itself tasted of copper and regret. Men slept in corners clutching their lost guns, muttering catechisms to saints that had long since stopped listening. The sky cracked open. At first it was only light, a single wound drawn across the heavens, bright enough to carve shadows into Pharaoh-Crete. Then came the sound. A long, low scream that was not thunder, nor machine, nor man. The Vox systems in the trenches howled and bled static. Cogitators burst into fire, and then it rode out of the void. A meteor of black flame struck the wastes beyond the last hab block. Its fire did not spread outward but inward, devouring light, heat, and sanity alike. The ground split into rings of molten stone. The first soldiers sent to investigate were found later, melted into the ash, their helmets fused to their skulls as if punished by something older than judgment. No one spoke of it, not until it began to move. The smell of fire and fear. We were a salvage unit, 6 men and 1 half-functioning servitor. We were searching for fuel cells among the wreckage when the ash storm died suddenly. That was when I smelled it. Burnt oil, singed flesh, and something else. The impossible scent of gasoline, a relic of a forgotten age when men rode machines for pleasure rather than war. The servitor froze mid-step. Its cogitator stuttered in binary prayer. Fire, unholy chemical, hell. Then we saw it. A silhouette in the dust. Black, skeletal, and burning. Chains dragged behind it like the rattling of souls. A wheel of flame tore through the wasteland, carving symbols into the ground that no priest of the emperor would ever bless. It was a man, or had once been one. Leather cracked and blackened around a frame of impossible resilience. Where his head should have been, there was only fire. Eyes of molten judgment burned without blinking, without mercy. Each movement sent heat rippling through the air, warping the very reality around him. We fell to our knees, not in worship, in instinctive terror, the kind of terror that made your bones remember sin. The thing stopped before us, its voice like a furnace speaking words it did not wish to. This world is guilty, and the flames grew taller. A soul out of place, the Vox picked up screams for hours after that encounter. The nearby Hab sector gone. Melted slag and smoke rising into the toxic sky. Witnesses swore they saw a flaming skull riding a machine that roared louder than any tank, dragging chains of judgment across the guilty and innocent alike. The ecclesiarchy declared it a demon. The Mechanicus demanded samples. The Inquisition silent but watching, always watching. But the locals began to whisper. They said the fires didn't burn the righteous, that one heretic preacher's body turned to ash while his young acolyte walked free. They said the thing spoke words of punishment, of oaths broken, of vengeance older than the Imperium itself. And every time it came, the warp shimmered just a little stronger. The fire meets faith. A week later, a squad of Sisters of Battle confronted it in the ruins of St. Meliora's Cathedral. They expected demonic corruption, screaming mutation, warp-born madness. What they found was worse. He stood before the altar, flames licking the broken marble saints. The smell of sanctified oil and brimstone filled the air. "Who are you?" the canonist demanded, bolter aimed steady. "A demon in mockery of man?" The skull turned slowly toward her, eyes burning with something that remembered pain. "I am vengeance for the forgotten dead." Bolters fired. Rounds met flame. The impact turned into light. And then the chains came, alive serpentine, wrapping around the marble pillars and tearing them down as easily as wet parchment. The sisters fought bravely, but the fire consumed everything it touched, yet left no smoke. When dawn came, only one sister survived. She crawled to the nearest Vox outpost and whispered, "He burns sinners, but he weeps while doing it." Echoes in the warp psychers began to dream of the rider. In the Skola temples, children screamed in unison, clutching their faces and drawing burning wheels on the floor with their own blood. In orbit, the astropaths reported a flare in the immaterium. Something bright, disciplined, and furious, unlike any warp entity they'd catalogued. One inquisitor, Marius Holt, Ordo Hereticus, recorded the following: "It is no demon. The warp recoils from him. It is as if hell itself refuses his fire." But such statements vanished into sealed archives. The Imperium does not tolerate contradictions. And a creature of burning sin that judges without sanction, that cannot be controlled. The first judgment weeks later, the rider found his first true target. A planetary governor, fat, perfumed, surrounded by guards. He ruled through starvation and spectacle, executing one worker a day for amusement. When the flaming wheels roared through his courtyard, he thought it was a rebellion. He laughed, until the fire entered his palace. Glass melted, gold dripped like wax. The rider's voice filled every hall, echoing from the bones of the dead. "You sold your soul for power. Now feel what it buys." The governor begged, swore loyalty to the emperor, but the fire was older than the Imperium, a justice that did not care for hierarchies, banners, or oaths. When morning came, there was nothing left of the governor but a statue of black glass, screaming silently toward the heavens. The twist: the Inquisition finally sent a containment fleet. Ships in orbit launched holy bombardments. The Rider vanished into the storms, swallowed by the planet's ash seas. For weeks, the world fell silent again. People prayed. Some even hoped. Then one night, every Prometheum torch in the hive went out at once. And from the shadows, a voice spoke through every vox, every machine, every beating heart. I was sent here to burn the guilty, but in this galaxy, the flames burst from the walls, devouring light, sound, and sanity. There are no innocent, and that was how the legend began. But that was only the beginning, for what came next was the Imperium's attempt to harness the fire itself, to chain vengeance. Hell has many doors. The Warp simply built more. Before he was a myth whispered in the dark corners of the Imperium, before his fire became both curse and weapon, he was Johnny Blaze, a name long forgotten, lost among the ruins of the ancient Earth, before even the Age of Strife. Somewhere in the millennia that followed, when Terra itself became holy and forbidden, his story decayed into fragments of heretical scripture. The burning penitent, the rider of wrath, the chain that binds the damned. But his truth began with a deal, and all deals have echoes. The last memory of the man called Blaze in some corner of the Immaterium, far from mortal stars, a soul screamed forever. It remembered wheels, gasoline, and betrayal. It remembered her face, the one he sold his soul to save. And it remembered the laughter of the demon who took it all away. When his world died, his curse remained. Even as human civilization collapsed, even as the Warp swallowed the skies, the spirit of vengeance endured, because damnation, once given, is eternal. But eternity is fragile in the Warp. During one of the great psychic storms that swallowed entire systems, perhaps during the birth of the Great Rift, perhaps before, a fragment of that damned essence was torn loose from its prison. The Immaterium screamed, and something old and furious fell through. The Warp's firebirth, the event was logged later in the archives of the Ordo Malleus as anomalous manifestation 992 Meridian. A burning object of unknown mass emerged from non-space, traversed the veil, and impacted the world of Carthagos 4. Local time flux ratio. 1 second equals 13,000 subjective years. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, it was an aberration of physics. To the Ecclesiarchy, a heresy of flame. To the Warp, a contamination. Because the Warp recognized the thing that entered it and recoiled. Its flames did not corrupt. They burned corruption itself. Where demons howled, the Rider's presence silenced them. Where Warp things fed on fear, they found only pain. This was not the fire of chaos. It was the fire that chaos fled from. And thus, the spirit of vengeance was reborn in a galaxy that had forgotten what vengeance meant. The first awakening, he awoke in the ash wastes. The ground beneath him was slagged rock, the sky a red smear of pollution and half-dead suns. There were no cars here, no roads, only the endless hum of industry and war. But when he clenched his fists, flame erupted between his fingers. Chains, familiar as breath, coiled around his arms. He felt the weight of souls. Tens of billions, guilty, damned, lost, screaming across the stars. And somewhere, in the distance, a voice whispered through the Warp. Another servant of the dark gods rises. No, answered another, older voice. This one burns them. The machine that shouldn't exist. When the Rider rose, the Warp bent. Matter obeyed memory. He remembered his bike, and it answered. From molten rock and warp iron, a machine assembled itself. Pistons fused with daemon bone. Tires ignited in holy flame. The fuel not gasoline but sin. Each rotation of its wheels was a confession. Each spark a scream. The first sound that filled that dead world was not thunder. It was the growl of a spirit remembering what it once was. He rode again, and the galaxy trembled. The echo of the Emperor. There are forbidden records, apocryphal fragments found in a Mechanicus vault on Mars, that describe a vision the Emperor once had before the Great Crusade. It spoke of a firebound one who would walk the stars after his ascension, carrying both damnation and judgment, a being not of chaos nor man, but of penance. "He shall ride upon the sins of men," said the vision, "and his chains shall choke even the gods." The Mechanicus called it myth. The ecclesiarchy burned the record. But some whispered that when the great rift tore the galaxy in half, the prophecy finally came true. A universe without innocence. When the rider began to wander the void, he saw what humanity had become. Worlds enslaved by faith. Billions starved for the glory of a God who never answered. And those who did not pray, consumed by chaos or worse. In that moment, his old curse reawakened. The spirit of vengeance demanded balance. But here, in the 41st millennium, there was none. He judged a heretic once, and the ground split beneath him. He judged a priest, and the same fire answered. Even when he found an innocent, the flames still whispered, "None are pure, none are whole." He began to question himself. Who was he to judge a universe where damnation was survival? What was sin in a world built on war? And still he burned. The birth of the legend, the first cult formed around his passing. Scavengers who survived his fire built shrines from melted glass and scorched iron. They named him the Burning Saint, the Redeemer in Flame, the Penitent Machine. But their prayers twisted his purpose. Every devotion fed the warp, every sermon birthed reflection, until entire hives began to dream of a flaming figure riding through their streets, judging sinners and soldiers alike. The Inquisition intervened. Those cults were purged in fire. And so the cycle began anew, fire-consuming fire. The first encounter with the Imperium decades later, the Inquisitor Marius Holt found evidence of a pattern. Entire settlements reduced to ash, yet free of chaos taint. Witnesses claimed a burning figure spared no one but the children. Holt declared exterminatus-level heresy. But the ship he sent to investigate never returned. Only a Vox signal drifted back. A single line of data, burned into the receiver as though by heat. You cannot judge judgment. After that, the Ordo Hereticus declared the phenomenon unclassifiable threat entity, Rex Infernum. Others gave him a simpler name, the Old One, the Forgotten One, Ghost Rider. And yet, the fire endures through the centuries that followed. His presence flickered like a curse through the stars. Some worlds swore they saw him before their doom. A flaming rider standing silent on the horizon before orbital bombardment. Others claimed he haunted the warp lanes, riding between ships, a burning specter trailing judgment behind him. No matter where he appeared, only one thing was always the same. When he left, nothing impure remained. He is not demon. He is not angel. He is what comes after sin. Fragment recovered from the ruins of High Vesta. But that was only the beginning. For the galaxy's rulers, the Imperium, the Mechanicus, and even the servants of chaos, would not let such a force roam unclaimed. Next came the attempts to harness the flame, to cage vengeance itself, and to learn, far too late, what happens when man tries to command hell. We learn to work by the light of his flame. Some prayed to it, some feared it, all were burned by it. Testimony of a hab worker, Carthagos for the world that never slept. Every dawn on Carthagos 4 was the same, gray light smothered in smoke, the hum of broken machinery, the air thick with the taste of rust and sin. No birds, no laughter, only the hiss of vents and the coughs of men. The people rose before the alarms sounded. They always did, because the alarms were not what woke them. It was the silence before them. In that silence, each worker whispered the same prayer. Emperor, let the flame pass me by. For weeks now, the world had lived under the shadow of something that punished sin. And here, sin was survival itself. Stealing rations, lying about quotas, trading corpses for food. Every act condemned by the same fire that burned the heretics and the wicked alike. The people learned to live smaller, quieter, invisible. But even that was not enough. The smell of sweat and faith, the manufactoria, were temples in all but name. Lines of men and women in oil-stained robes labored beneath frescoes of the emperor, their faces hidden behind cracked respirators. Overseers watched from high gantries, shock malls humming. Each spark of defiance was met with blood. But lately, even the overseers looked afraid. Rumors said one of them had tried to escape with contraband promethium. They found him the next morning, chained to his own loader machine. The entire assembly line melted around him as if kissed by fire. There were no witnesses, only scorched footprints leading out into the ash. The workers didn't speak of it. They just worked faster. Some began leaving offerings. Bits of burnt metal, scraps of parchment with their names written in ash, hoping that if the burning rider saw their devotion, he might spare them. They called him the Silent Flame, and to their surprise, for a while, he did not return. The children of Ash children grew up learning to tell stories in whispers. One went like this: "If you lie, the rider will come. If you steal, the rider will find you. If you kill, the rider will burn you. But if you tell the truth, he will burn you slower." The adults didn't stop them. There was no innocence here, only smaller sins waiting to grow. Still, the children drew his image on the walls, a flaming skull always smiling. Some said it kept the demons away. Others said it only made him notice faster. One day, a child drew his likeness in soot and offered it a prayer of apology for stealing bread. That night, her entire hab block caught fire. But she was found the next morning, unburnt, sitting calmly among the ashes, whispering, "He forgave me." The priests declared it a miracle. The Inquisition declared it witchcraft. The people just worked harder. The machines keep turning. Each day was a ritual of repetition. Wake, work, worship, survive. At mid-shift, the Vox horns would crackle with sermons from the mini-storm. The Emperor sees all sins. The Emperor judges all. The Emperor forgives none. But after the rider came, the sermons changed. Now they added a new line, one that no one dared question. "And if his fire walks among you, rejoice, for your punishment is proof of his love." Men laughed bitterly under their breath. It was the kind of laughter that sounds like choking. Faith became currency, and currency became faith. If you had the means to bribe the priest, your sins could be cleansed with holy oil. If not, well, the rider didn't take bribes. When the fire appeared every few nights, the sky would glow red again. Not lightning, something else. Some swore they heard the roar of an engine echoing across the wastes, followed by screams that never seemed to end. The manufactoria lights would flicker. The air would taste of iron and oil. Then silence. By morning, one more district would be gone, reduced to blackened stone and twisted metal. The fire didn't spread naturally. It burned exactly where it wanted to. There was a pattern, though no one understood it yet. The rider wasn't destroying at random. He was judging, and that meant someone somewhere was keeping score. The rituals of fear. People started inventing ways to hide their guilt. Some cut small brands into their own flesh to mark repentance. Others drank machine oil, believing it would make their blood less sinful. A cult even arose, the Children of the Chain, who wrapped themselves in scavenged metal links and dragged them through the streets, chanting, "He burns us now, that we may not burn later." The ecclesiarchy disapproved, publicly. Privately, they collected offerings from the cult's members. Fear was profitable. In the underhives, another ritual took root, burning a tiny spark of promethium each night and whispering a confession into it. Those who forgot sometimes didn't wake up. The servitors found them at dawn, blackened corpses with eyes of ash. Voices in the Vox, even the Vox channels, were haunted. Transmissions would twist into static, then a low, rumbling growl would cut through the noise, like an engine idling at the edge of hearing. Some engineers claimed to hear words in that growl. "Do you repent? Do you deserve the breath you take?" They tried to scrub the frequencies, replace the relays, but every new machine burned out within hours. Finally, the overseer sealed the Vox entirely. No one spoke over comms again. They learned to communicate in hand signals and nods. The rider needed no words to hear confession. The dreamers, there were those who saw him in dreams. They said the dreams always began the same. A long road of bone and ash, a will turning endlessly in the distance, and a voice whispering, "Ride with me." Some never woke from these dreams. Their bodies charred in their bunks, though the habs showed no fire. Others awoke changed, silent, eyes glowing faintly red. They became zealots, preaching repentance in his name. For a time, the Inquisition hunted them, then realized killing them only spread the faith faster. so they simply stopped speaking of it. Between hunger and hope in time, the people adjusted. They always do. Even fear becomes routine when it lasts long enough. Children played near the burnt districts, daring one another to touch the blackened stones. Workers went about their shifts with dull eyes, muttering that, at least the rider kills fast. Priests prayed more loudly but with less conviction. And every night, when the sky glowed faintly orange, someone somewhere would whisper, "At least he burns the corrupt." It was a lie. But in this world, lies were warmer than truth. Whispers of the coming judgment, then came the omens. Warp storms flickered across the horizon. Machines began to hum in unison, even when unpowered. Dreams grew longer, and in the ash wastes, scouts reported a trail of glowing sigils carved into the rock. Each one the same, a wheel of fire, turning, waiting. The last report before the signal went dark said only this: "He's not hunting sinners anymore. He's hunting the Inquisition." But that was only the beginning, for next came the Great Reckoning, when the rider's flame would meet the Empire's machines of faith, and both would learn that judgment, once unleashed, cannot be caged. The Imperium does not understand mercy. It understands containment. Fragment from the sealed transcript of Inquisitor Marius Holt: "The fire draws eyes for a time. The Imperium tried to pretend the rider didn't exist. Official reports were censored. Witnesses vanished. Entire hives that burned overnight were listed as industrial accidents. But the fire kept coming. And when something burns so brightly, even the blind turn their heads. The Ecclesiarchy declared it divine punishment. The Mechanicus called it anomaly class ignition phenomena. The Inquisition called it heresy on two legs. Each faction claimed jurisdiction. Each sought to control the thing that judged them. They did not realize you cannot own vengeance. You can only survive it. The Ecclesiarchy's doctrine of flame, the first to act were the priests. The Ministorum saw the panic in the lower hives and decided to make use of it. They issued a new decree, the Litany of Burning Grace. It proclaimed the rider as an angel of the Emperor's wrath, sent to purify the wicked and remind humanity of its place. "Those he burns are blessed," thundered the Confessor General. "For through pain they are returned to purity." In practice, it meant executions doubled overnight. Priests burned entire families to appease his flame. The smell of charred flesh became incense. Those who questioned the doctrine disappeared. Those who obeyed prayed for smaller flames. And somewhere far below their cathedrals, a shadow of smoke passed silently through the streets, watching them, judging. The Mechanicus and the sacred study of damnation to the priests of Mars. Fire was data. And this fire, one that obeyed no physical law, was irresistible. Explorator fleets deployed to the burnt worlds. Muggos Pyrolus himself ordered containment units constructed from black adamantium and phase-tempered null fields. Their objective: capture the entity, study the flame, replicate it as a weapon of purity. They sent servoskulls across the wastes. They analyzed every scorch mark, every molecule of ash. Their cogitators reached one conclusion: this fire converts sin into energy. It made no sense. It broke the laws of thermodynamics and the faith of the omniscia alike. But heresy and curiosity are twins in the machine cult. So they built a trap, a cathedral of steel deep beneath the planet's crust. They baited it with blood, corruption, and confession. And one night he came. The trap, the rider, entered the Mechanicus forged sarcophagus without hesitation. He did not sneak. He rode straight through the gates, his engine growling like a sermon. The adepts triggered the containment seals. The walls folded inward. Vox prayers chanted in binary. Null fields humming. For one heartbeat it worked. The flames dimmed. The skull's fire flickered blue. The Muggos raised his hands in triumph. Then the rider turned his gaze upon him. "You dare chain judgment?" The fire erupted. Containment melted. Iron turned to gas. Binary prayers dissolved into screams. When it was over, the forge was silent. Its halls glowing with molten metal, its data vaults erased by heat. Only one recording survived. A scorched scrap of audio, repeating endlessly, "We built a prison of sin, and he burned the sin first." The Inquisition moves after that. The Ordo Hereticus took command. The fire was no longer an anomaly. It was a threat. They called it Rex Infernum. They summoned fleets. They assembled psychers, nulls, and assassins. They wrote scriptures of containment, each line soaked in blood. The Inquisitor Marius Holt was chosen to lead. He was a man without mercy, famous for burning 3 hive cities to stop one heretical uprising. To him, guilt was not proven, it was inevitable. He arrived in orbit and broadcast his decree across the planet. By the authority of the God Emperor, the burning heresy shall be extinguished. No flame burns forever. But below, the fire was already listening. The purge begins. The Inquisition's purge squads moved like steel ghosts. They executed witnesses, sealed vox lines, erased data. There are whispers of a burning ghost. The report began. A spirit that judges the guilty, but not in the Emperor's name. The candlelight in the chamber trembled as the words were read aloud. Inquisitor Merathvos did not blink. He simply closed the parchment, letting the wax seal melt in his gloved hand until it hissed against the metal of his augmetic fingers. The air in his sanctum smelled of incense, oil, and scorched parchment, a scent he found comforting, the scent of truth being purified. A heretic spirit of fire, he murmured, looking out the slit window at the smog-shrouded hive far below. How quaint! Voss was not a man of faith. He was a man of certainty, and in the Imperium that was far more dangerous. He turned to the servoskull hovering beside him. The single optic flickered. "Track it," he commanded. "Every report of flame, every unexplained purge, every heretic who dies screaming of burning chains. I want all of it." The skull beeped compliance, then drifted into the dark. Voss smiled faintly, a smile that held no warmth. Let's see what kind of ghost defies the Inquisition. 2 months later, the world of Ramfor was a scar, its soil black with ash, its cathedrals hollowed out. The Inquisitor's ship, the Penance of Faith, descended through red clouds like a blade drawn from oil. Everywhere it landed, the ground seemed to recoil. He stepped out in his iron-gray coat, his rosette glinting faintly. Behind him, a squad of stormtroopers in rebreathers fanned out. The locals called this place the Burned Belt. They said a flaming skull had ridden through here not long ago. They said sinners screamed until their hearts turned to glass. Voss found that almost poetic. He knelt beside one of the charred remains. The bones were still warm, not from heat but from something else. Warp residue. He scraped it into a vial. The vapor curled like smoke and whispered faint words. "Vengeance? Still burning?" Voss smirked. "Then we're close." That night, the winds carried more than dust. Voices, cries, chains clattering somewhere far beyond the horizon. The stormtroopers grew restless. One muttered prayers. Another checked his weapon again and again. When the first flame appeared, they thought it was lightning. When the motor roar followed, they realized it was something else. Through the black storm came the sound of metal grinding on stone, and then the light hit, a wheel of pure fire, cutting through the night like a comet. A figure astride it, cloaked in shadow and wrath. The Ghost Rider. The troopers opened fire. Bolter shells screamed. The flames answered, turning each bullet into molten sparks. One by one they fell, their armor fusing to bone. Their screams echoed long after their bodies were gone. When the smoke cleared, only Voss remained, standing before the rider, unshaken. "You kill sinners," he said calmly. "Yet you defy the Emperor's order. That makes you one." The rider said nothing. Only the low crackle of fire filled the air. "Kneel," Voss commanded. "Confess. I'll grant you cleansing in his name." The rider's skull turned slightly, flames flickering blue for a moment. "Your Emperor doesn't forgive," came the voice of ash and thunder. "He forgets." Voss's jaw tightened. "Then I'll remind him." He raised his rosarius. The air shimmered, wards of faith and psychic steel flaring to life. The rider's chain shot forward, striking the barrier. Sparks and warp light exploded outward. The ground split beneath them. Voss gritted his teeth, channeling psychic force through his staff. "You will answer to me, demon. I answer to no one." The chain wrapped around Voss's staff. Flame met void shield. Each pulse of power sent tremors through the ruins. And then, for a moment, Voss saw through the fire. A man's face, scarred, tormented, human. "You were once mortal," Voss whispered. The rider's fire dimmed slightly. "And you were once innocent." That was all it took. The shield shattered. The fire consumed everything. When the flames died, only the Inquisitor's rosette remained, half melted, half buried in glass. But death is never simple in the Imperium, especially for those who serve too zealously. As the wind carried the ashes away, the rosette flickered, and somewhere in the warp, a new flame stirred. The Inquisitor of Ash and Iron had not perished. He had been reborn, reforged in the same fire he sought to destroy. The Imperium would soon hear rumors again, not of one flaming rider, but two. One human soul burning for vengeance, and another burning for faith twisted into hate. And their paths would cross again. But that was only the beginning of the end. The void between stars is silent, but not empty. In that abyss, two lights burned, one gold, one red, both carried by souls who had forgotten what peace even meant. The Ghost Rider, the eternal flame of judgment, and Mayrath Voss, the Inquisitor reborn in the warp, his soul twisted by the very fire he tried to destroy. They were brothers now, not by blood, by damnation. When Voss awoke, he was not in a body of flesh. He was metal and bone fused by divine fire, his veins pumping molten faith instead of blood. Where his heart once was, now glowed a burning rosette, cracked, blackened, and alive. He could hear it whispering, "Purge the unclean, even if they are gods." He stood in the remains of what looked like a cathedral, floating in the void. Its walls were carved from angel wings and screaming faces. Before him lay his new steed, a hovering construct of broken cherubs, their faces welded into one burning helm. He did not question it. He mounted it. The Inquisitor of Ash and Iron had returned. Meanwhile, across the war-torn world of Hellion 9, Ghost Rider rode through the ruins of a hive city reduced to cinders. The streets hissed with rain falling on molten metal. Everywhere he passed, the shadows of the guilty whispered his name. He had begun to change. His fire no longer burned only for sin. It flickered for something deeper, something like pity. He saw too much. Too many corpses buried under banners of purity. Too many innocents executed for survival. The Imperium burned its own people to feel holy. And he, the ghost of vengeance, could smell the hypocrisy like blood in water. But he was not the only flame in the dark anymore. It began with thunder. But it wasn't thunder. It was the roar of engines. Holy engines. The sky split open, raining gold fire as the Inquisitor of Ash and Iron descended from orbit. His armor gleamed like a cathedral on fire. His eyes were furnaces of belief. He landed before the rider, wings of metal unfolding from his back. The earth cracked beneath his boots. "I purged heresy for centuries," Voss said, his voice echoing through the storm. "And yet I became what I hunted. You showed me that." The rider's skull flared brighter. "Then learn from it." Voss raised his hand, the melted rosette blazing. "I have, and I learned that mercy is the greatest heresy of all." The air turned to ash. A halo of black fire crowned his head. The two flames stared across the wasteland, one a curse of vengeance, the other a martyr of obsession. And then they charged. When their chains collided, the world screamed. Mountains cracked. Oceans boiled. Every living thing for miles felt their hearts ignite with rage, guilt, or both. The rider's chain burned with the sins of mankind, glowing white with every atrocity it remembered. The Inquisitor's weapon, a relic staff reforged from broken relics, burned gold, each swing a sermon in flame. "You burn without faith," Voss thundered. "Your fire has no purpose." "Purpose is the first lie," the rider roared back. All that's left is consequence. The Inquisitor's steed lunged, a spectral chimera of wings and blades. The rider's bike roared, leaping through the air, flame trailing like a comet's tail. They met mid-sky, a collision of damnation and belief. The explosion turned night into day. Every city below turned to glass, and the screams of the dead rose like a hymn. In that burning light, for one moment they saw each other. Two souls bound by the same chain, one seeking redemption, the other denying it. And then the warp split open again. A third voice entered the storm, cold, vast, ancient. Two flames. The same source, how beautiful. The stars themselves dimmed as something vast looked down upon them. A warp entity older than chaos, drawn to the purity of their fury. Neither demon nor god, something between. The fire faltered. The rider's skull turned upward. The Inquisitor froze mid-strike. "What is that?" he breathed. "Judgment," the rider said quietly. "Not ours. Theirs." And then the sky opened. From the void came a storm of wings made of smoke and fire, angels and demons entwined. A host that worshipped nothing but flame itself. They descended like falling stars, and the ground quaked beneath their arrival. The universe itself seemed to whisper, "The fire that judges has become the fire that creates." Ghost Rider and Voss, the twin flames of damnation, were no longer alone. Something had come to claim them both, but neither would kneel. "Then let them burn too," Voss growled. "Always," the rider answered, and together, enemies, brothers, opposites, they turned toward the coming storm. Flames against eternity. The stars burned out one by one. Each blink of darkness was a heartbeat, slow, final, inevitable. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath, and in that breathless gulf between death and creation, two figures stood. The Ghost Rider and the Inquisitor of Ash and Iron. Below them lay nothing. No cities, no planets, no Imperium, only the smoldering remains of what had been Hellion 9. Above them, the sky peeled open like a wound. From it emerged something vast. Something that did not move, but was movement. A presence so immense that space folded beneath its gaze. A shape of flame and void, wings unfurling across light years. Its face, if it had one, was a burning mask, half human, half demon, with eyes that mirrored both the rider's skull and Voss's halo. "I am what your flames built," it said, a voice of thunder and whispers. "I am the god of fire and silence, born from your vengeance, fed by your faith." The world trembled. The twin riders felt their flames recoil like frightened children. "You are not a god," the Ghost Rider growled, fire rising. "You are the echo of pain that never learned to die." The being laughed. "And what is divinity, if not pain that never ends?" Its wings spread. Every spark that ever burned in mankind's history, every candle, torch, and sun, flickered in its shadow. The Inquisitor of Ash and Iron raised his staff, defiance etched into his molten face. "If you are born from faith, then faith will unmake you." He struck, unleashing a torrent of holy fire. It lanced across the void like a spear of gold, divine, pure, absolute. The god absorbed it and smiled. "I was forged in your prayers," it said. "I feed on your devotion." The rider's chain lashed out next, glowing white-hot, fueled by every sin humanity ever committed. When it struck, the impact tore a hole through the fabric of space, a scream of light and despair. But still, the god remained. It turned its gaze upon them, and they saw their reflections within it. The rider saw every sinner he had condemned, faces begging for mercy. Voss saw every soul he had executed, eyes filled with faith betrayed. Both fell to their knees, their flames flickering like dying stars. "You are me," the god whispered, "and I am you. I am the hunger that drives judgment. I am the silence after the scream." Its massive hand descended not to crush, but to claim. And in that moment, both flames reacted. Voss and the rider looked to one another, enemies, brothers, mirrors. "We burn, so others don't have to," the rider said quietly. Then we burn together, Voss replied. Their flames intertwined, red and gold, sin and faith, wrath and penitence. They rose as one, a spiral of pure, uncontained fire, so bright that the god itself recoiled. The flames screamed, not in rage, but in choice. And then they detonated. Silence, real silence. No thunder, no fire, no screams. Only a whisper, drifting across the endless dark. We were never gods. We were the price. When the light faded, the god of fire and silence was gone. Its form shattered into embers, scattered through the galaxy, each ember becoming a star. In their place, only two figures remained. The Inquisitor knelt in the dust, his armor cracked, his eyes empty. The Ghost Rider stood beside him, skull dimmed to faint orange, like the last glow of a dying hearth. Did we win? Voss asked, voice hollow. There is no winning, the Rider answered. Only burning slow enough to remember why. The Inquisitor laughed weakly. Then what are we now? The Rider looked to the horizon, where the ashes of creation turned to dawnlight. Keepers, he said, not of fire, of silence. He turned away, the sound of his bike igniting once more. The flames trailed behind him, not violent now, but gentle, like the last light of a setting sun. The Inquisitor watched him go, the wind whispering over the broken world. Then he too vanished, leaving behind only two scorched marks in the dust. A skull of fire and a rosette of ash, side by side, eternal. And somewhere, far beyond the veil, in the heart of the warp itself, the god's voice echoed softer now, fading with awe. Even fire can choose to go quiet. Epilogue, ashes remember. In the millennia that followed, imperial priests spoke of strange miracles, of worlds where no heretic ever rose, no demon ever came, of nights when the stars burned a little brighter, then dimmed, as if something unseen passed among them. They called it the mercy of the burning ghosts, and no one ever agreed if it was blessing or curse. But the few who still dared to whisper in the dark said this: when the guilty sleep, two riders watch the horizon, one of ash, one of flame, and they burn not to destroy, but to keep the silence alive.